episode is very exciting for me personally because unlike the previous ones when we had to wait and collect comments and views from the public, we actually are live reporting from what is happening behind me. Street vendors have decided to take it upon themselves to invite different political leaders of different political parties who are gearing up for elections. They are very smart. They have a list of grievances that they want addressed, and they felt this is the right time for them to corner politicians in order for them to get what they want.
Ntate ka go re ba palang ka ganaha mosebetsi mo go sebetsa go thusa mmuso ka tsela e kgethehileng ntho re hloka mo re sebetsang teng go go thusa go lwana go ma China ska nka kgobo ya rona ba na rena matla o di maola ke ska ha re melata e tloe kgwebong tsa rona ka ka re na le mona ka phagala ka tshotla le bona ha go jwalo go ba mohatle ka ga di shopo tsa melata go ba le metšhini ya tsepa ba itshule re tla bula post bank mane re tla swipe we tšhelete ya rona e kene ka gana haina na ha rona e sotleile matsogong a rona bana ba rona tla ba di sona ba hatellwa ke bana ba melata kana ha bo rona e ruile ka kana ha re tsa ke o fuwa mesebetsi re tsa ka go hatuwe ntho tsa rona tse hatuweng ntate wa ha re fika tebeng ya di 500 go re relle haholo go ba le tšhelete e teng a se go ha eo ha o fitla ho ntate le fina la small business o go tine ke bala manane ntate na trade go ke fie ntate mokukure finance ho hana ka tšhelete.
Today we have former Minister Health and currently All Basotho Convention leader Nkaku Kabi, who according to the Street Vendors Association or the Street Vendors group was the first politician to actually heed their call and afforded time to listen to what the street vendors were saying. One of the things that the street vendors are complaining about is lack of water to allow them to work in hygiene environments. They are saying they don't need the government to give them anything. They just want the government to allow or to make possible conducive environment for them to work and operate. What is more interesting about today's episode is when Minister Kabi or when Mr. Kabi was a minister in the previous government, he was party to the many promises that were made to different sectors of the nation, and in this particular regard we are talking about the street vendors. They want their promised 500 grant which was promised during the hard lockdown induced by COVID-19 in 2020. And the most funny thing about it is Mr. Kabi was a minister of health at that particular point in time. He was one of the leading ministers who pushed towards or who pushed for the hard lockdown. And we should also remember that during the time when Lesotho was faced with the hard lockdown, we had not recorded not even one single case of COVID-19. There was no specific plan on how we are going to actually counter any case of COVID-19 if we were to actually record any cases. So what he is saying epitomizes the face of politicians in the country. We are going for elections, and I think most of our episodes are going to actually look at what politicians say, look at what politicians are promising now vis-a-vis what they were supposed to implement but failed. Minister Kabi along with his Mr. I keep saying minister because he was minister, and we know him around that time when he was Minister of Health. He became very popular. This is the same minister who, under his leadership, or this is the same man who, when was minister, donated PPE when missing. A number of people, or 2 people, were actually arrested, but not a lot happened. This is the same man who, under his leadership, a lot of inconsistencies, a lot of corruption, allegations were pinned to him. So he stood before street vendors and made promises. Promise number 1: he will assist street vendors to open the right doors for them to get their grievances addressed.
Ile ya tloa ya fihla ema crossbenching. Ile ya ema crossbenching hobane Makotata a ne a ile a roma Kabi hore a kene ka hara mmuso. Ya ba ditaba tseno ha di phethahale. Ha di sa phethahale di bolela hore dipotso tsena tse ntseng di botswa moo, Kabi o tlo thusana fela ka ho le kopanya le mafapha a amehang. Hobane Basotho ba ile ba ra dikgwedi tsena tse setseng pele re ya dikgethong, ha o ba tonakgolo Kabi o tlo bo senya tjhelete. Ke la ka utlwisisa le ha ke sa tsebe na e sengwa jwang. Fela ditaba tsena tsa setjhaba ke ke ra di baleya hobane re boikarabello le matla ha di ho rona.
Why now? What did Ntate Kabi, did the street vendors, did street vendors have to call you before you can actually consider them as voters, consider them as human beings? Did they have to remind you, Ndate, that during the time when you were in government, when you were at the right position as a Minister of Health, the same minister which induced a lot of suffering because of ill advice which you took or which you got from, we don't know. At the time it was Command Center, then it was Narcosec. We really don't know where the advice to close down business, to close down life for Basotho before we report any COVID cases, where that advice came from. But the biggest question is, did street vendors really have to call you now and ask you as a leader of a political party? What about when you were still a minister, when you were still supposed to be serving them and you failed to serve them? It's very funny that you actually promised them to help knock on doors, yet you just told them you're not, ABC is not government. Politicians are literally frustrating the nation, and this is exactly what Ntate Kabi said. He says, with the new mushrooming political parties that are being registered and launched, the multitude of Basotho flocking to these new political parties actually confirms that Basotho are politically frustrated because they do not know where they should go from point 1 to point B, who should actually who to trust, who will address their needs. I have to applaud the street vendors for actually being very strategic. They are very strategic. They selected a time when everyone is willing to actually provide service. I have to commend Ntate Kabi for actually pointing out that Basotho are their biggest enemies, because after every 5 years or after every snap election, they are promised and promised and promised with no implementation of the promises. They are all the time disappointed, but every single time they go, they elect, they re-elect, and continue to re-elect people that when they get in power, badula ditulong tse jikang, and I borrow his words, ba lebala, when they are okay, nothing matters.
Mona molemi kaofela le ntse le halefile ha o ka theka June ho bua dikgetho le lo koloka le fihla le kgetha le be le re isetse hape gore Basotho ba jwang.
I guess with what he said and what the street vendors are complaining about and the strategy of the street vendors, it basically says every sector of the nation is now very strategic. Last week we spoke on this taxi operators being strategic and knowing which buttons to press. It looks like it's now going to be a trend for every sector of the nation if they want to have their issues addressed. This is definitely the fertile time for them to actually go point blank and ask critical questions and make demands, and we'll see what will happen. So with street vendors, a lot that was said, one thing is right at the top of it. They don't need the government to give them money. They don't need the government to hold their hands. They simply want the government to create an environment which will be conducive enough for them to continue hustling. That was very, very profound. So today it was Nkaku Kabi. We don't know who it will be tomorrow, but we are going to make it a point that every politician that will be addressing street vendors, public opinion will be there to listen and to actually try and analyze the things that they're saying, because politicians are artists. They like to be listened to. They like to make promises. This is public opinion. Until we meet again.